Hello, friends. Today we have a very special episode of On the Street featuring two distinguished LISD leaders, former Superintendent of Schools Tom Glenn and current Superintendent of Schools Dr. Bruce Gehring. Gentlemen, it's truly a pleasure to have you on the podcast today as we focus on unity for our one LISD community. We recently celebrated National Unity Day on October 16th. And with that being the case, I thought that we could have a discussion around how LISD has remained one district through significant and often challenging times. How does that sound?
This is such a great honor to be here, so super happy to be with Mr. Glenn.
Yes.
I call him Tom from now on.
That's right.
It's really great to be here, so thanks for having us, DeWayne.
No, thank you. And it's especially an honor to be here at your namesake, Mr. Glenn. Tom, I have a hard time saying that, but thank you so much. So how do you feel about us just jumping right into our conversation? Because I know our audience will find value in our discussion.
Yeah, let's go.
Good for me.
All right. So Tom, how long did you serve as the LISD superintendent?
I was superintendent for a little over 20 years. I started in the district in 1979.
When you were like 18?
Yeah.
Okay, just checking.
Actually, when I became superintendent, I was just 36 years old.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
And so I became superintendent in 1987 and served until into 2008.
So you saw some significant changes in our district. And then we were talking before we started recording, and when you came to Leander in 1979, our student population was 4,000.
No, in 1970, that's when I became superintendent. And in 1979, there were only about 2,700 students. So,
Wow.
So about as many as in Vista Ridge High School.
Yeah, exactly. And, Leander was just basically a speed trap on 183.
Yeah.
So it was a small district, but spread out.
And so you guided us through some explosive growth in terms of facilities and demographics. And when you look back over your time as superintendent, what were some of the key challenges that you had to confront as it relates to district cohesion?
Well, as I said earlier, this is geographically, it's a very large district. It's a little under 200 square miles. And at the time I became superintendent, we had Leander High School, Leander Middle School. We had just opened our 4th elementary school. And the southern part of our district, down on 2222, down toward 360, there wasn't much of a population there. And so we didn't worry about that part much. We had some problems with bus transportation. Students were riding on a bus for well over an hour to get to Leander High School specifically. And one of the challenges that came about soon after I became superintendent was, how are we going to deal with the growth? Because the growth at that time was solid, and then it was ramping up as well. And the milestone that comes to mind when you talk about maintaining unity was opening up Cedar Park High School. Because people were tired of driving from the southern portion of the district all the way up to Leander High School. And I remember at the time having parent meetings. I remember specifically in a meeting in Leander High School in the Commons, where we had a group of pretty rabid parents who wanted us to follow Westlake's example and to have a 9th grade center instead of forming another high school. Most of these parents, centered around the athletically inclined, and they thought that was a good example to follow. And we had to explain that, Westlake is like 35 square miles.
Right.
And we're 200 square miles, and that there were going to be, ultimately many high schools in our district. And that it provided an opportunity for more students to participate in athletics, fine arts, those kinds of things at the varsity level. So I just remember that specifically, and in a district, any district really, when you open that second high school, it causes a lot of upheaval in your district. And so we spent a lot of time communicating with people, helping them understand why we were taking this route. And ultimately, we got a bond issue passed and we're able to build Cedar Park High School.
Yeah, I could see where having a second high school would be a challenge to the cohesion of the district. But it sounds like when you were superintendent, you were able to manage that through communication and making sure that people understood why we were doing what we were doing, which I think goes a long way in maintaining that unity, because if not, people can splinter off and start filling in the gaps on their own.
Exactly. We communicated that over and over and over again, and some people still weren't satisfied, but ultimately once a decision like that is made, people tend to agree with it. And once the school was there, everybody was thrilled to death.
Yeah. No, I can see how that would be a significant challenge. You wanted to add something, Bruce?
Yeah, they say that once you open the second high school, once you get over that initial challenge, then it gets easier after that. But is that really what you experienced? Like, how was it to open a third and a fourth?
It was what we experienced. And in our district, we were rezoning for elementary schools and middle schools. So opening that next high school, Vista Ridge High School, was much easier. People understood that we were going to have more than one high school. And we already had two, so we had multiple high schools. And so it wasn't near I wouldn't say battle, but it wasn't near the upheaval in the community that the first one was.
So I'm fascinated too. After that, I mean, you were building. We added so many students in such a short period of time that must have sucked up so much of your time and energy. So how did you manage that on top of really establishing this incredible culture of continuous improvement and academic excellence at the same time?
I stumbled into hiring really good people. A good example of that is Jimmy Disler, and Jimmy took a lot of the load of the building kind of business off of my hands. I could work in generalities with Jimmy, and the more we worked together, the more he understood. The board came to trust Jimmy, and so we left a lot of that in his bailiwick. And we also had Ellen Scavera here, who helped a lot with that. And another member that I just forgot to mention is Jim Plain, who Jim Plain Elementary is named after. He was very instrumental in that. So we had good people to do that, so I could focus more on culture building, guiding documents, instruction, things of that nature.
When you look back on the expansion of the district, what was the chief challenge to culture at that time? I mean, we had changing demographics, we had this explosive growth. How were you able to maintain the uniqueness of the LISD culture? I know you mentioned hiring good people, which I totally agree with.
Yeah. We had to educate people over and over and over again. Students, parents, teachers, administrators. Ultimately, we developed what we called, a culture day, where we spent a lot of time talking with people about what our culture was. We used those guiding documents to help identify what that culture consisted of. So the development of the guiding documents, I think, helped us tremendously. And, we were bringing in over 10% of our teaching staff every year.
Wow.
So it was very important. And I spent that entire day with those new employees and interacted with them. We had prepared kinds of things for them to do to help them understand what our culture was. But I think even more importantly was just being able to sit down at a table and talk with them and get to know them a little bit. And our other administrators were involved with it as well. So it was an educational process, really, and a familiarization with who we were,
Mm-hmm.
and we wanted them to come along with us. Not that they couldn't have input and change the things that they saw that were problems. And we wanted them to be involved in that.
As part of the continuous improvement model.
Exactly.
New people coming in.
And I think it's just such an incredible example of unity building, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, the longevity of your leadership over that 20 years and this constancy of purpose that you put in front of the district every single time you got a new person in, they got this culture day, they got this understanding, this relationship building as to this is why it's different here, this is how we do things here, this is who we are in terms of values and core beliefs. And so that's the thing that attracted me to this district in the first place. And then as I got here and started uncovering that, it was just incredible how deep that culture really runs, even though the explosive growth put this challenge
on
of
that, yeah.
incremental degradation in front of us, because it's so hard to, you know, like take 10% new people every year and make sure that they really understand this is who we are and this is what our culture is and this is who you need to be if you're going to be here.
Right.
Yeah.
It even bled into our board. You know, you had board members who informally took on that role of helping other new board members as they come in. You know, we did the formal board introduction where we went through all the state requirements and all that, but we had several board members who took it upon themselves to help enculturate new board members. A good example of that was Donnie Heisel, who Heisel Elementary is named after, and he was instrumental in bringing on board members, even board members that were elected, say, to get rid of the superintendent or to change this or that or the other. So
I think that modeling piece is something that I noticed right away. I've been with the district now for a little less than 3 years. And when it comes to the culture, there are so many people who model what the culture is and who are willing to educate you. So the education is ongoing, it's intentional, and it's very impactful because people don't just say it, they live it. And so I think that's a testament to what you all did.
And the informal interactions to do that are just as important as
Yes.
the formal ones.
Yes.
I think it's fascinating because my first challenge that I wrote down for myself, anticipating your question, is the change that I had to make coming from a one high school community where everything was, you know, centered on that
high school.
High school. And we were starting to think about having to build that second high school. So I totally feel that pain of like, how do we take this culture that we have? How does it divide? And then how do you maintain a culture as a district when you've now got two separate high school cultures? But then moving to, you know, jumping from, you did it incrementally over time, even though it was really fast. But I literally did it overnight, moving from a one high school community to a seven high school sound, you know, with 6 comprehensive high schools and feeder patterns. And that, I'm still getting used to that, honestly. I'm in my 6th year now, and I'm still getting my head around how does this work differently, because it is just so incredibly different at scale.
It is. And so that leads me to a question for you, Bruce, around, you became superintendent in 2019. And when you reflect on your time here, what are some of the challenges? You mentioned, you know, coming from a one high school district to one that has multiple high schools that you faced in terms of maintaining the unity that was already here, because that's the hard part. It's hard to follow someone who did so much and still maintain that. So what were some of the challenges you had to confront?
Yeah, I think scale was the first one that I think about, because I had to get used to now having so many layers in the organization, and this business-wise operates completely differently. And then so your leadership has to change because you don't have a touch or a nudge on all the things that are happening. I didn't know all the campus principals even. I certainly didn't know all the teachers, and there was no way I could even get to know these kids. And so I was used to knowing a lot of the kids and being able to have one-on-one conversations. So that has been something that's been really, really difficult for me personally. And then, of course, I got here in September of 2019, and then in March we were on a spring break and don't ever come back. And so I was like, okay, I caught the bus, and now the wheels fell off. And so now what am I going to do? And so, and I think what came with that was this immediate divide of how do we pull people back, and how do we pull them together, and how do we get them to still feel a part of this organization when they're now so separate. So that was a challenge. And so we were on Facebook Live and all kinds of things, desperately trying to figure out ways
Using
to
the
pull
tools of
people
the
back
day.
in, right? And that's when, we had the privilege of bringing you on board. And that's what our conversation has been all along, is how do we draw people back into the center as the whole of our society is trying to drive everybody to the extremes. And so that I think has been a huge challenge, but one that I've really enjoyed trying to overcome. Because what came with that was things like book challenges and culture war and this idea that you have to choose one or the other.
Yes.
Right. And so I think that's really been
that was a
biggest challenge.
significant challenge because it seems like the world just changed the moment that we were impacted by COVID. And you think about everything that happened. It's only been 5 years, but it seems like it was a lifetime ago with everything that transpired from the shutdown to where we are now. And one of the conversations you and I had early on, Bruce, was about how do we fashion a practice here in Leander around these issues of diversity and inclusion that calls people in as opposed to calling people out. And I think more and more people realize that there's nuance and complexity around these issues, and you don't have to choose. It's okay to process. Slow it down. It's okay to process. And so you mentioned it was a privilege bringing me in. It was a privilege coming to a district that understood that. So, and I think that goes back to what you created along with all the people that you hired, Tom, who created that culture that we are a continuous improvement district, but we're also one where relationships matter. And we were challenged in 2022, 2023, to maintain that, but we did. And that's a testament, once again, to the leadership of the two men sitting here and the other people.
Sure.
We have another honored guest that we're going to bring on who also played an instrumental part in that.
But I think it's interesting to think, like, when we're living our moment, right, we think that our problems this is the first time these things have happened, right?
Right.
But I'd be interested to know your perspective on having watched us having to go through all these things. I bet there were times when you were doing almost the exact same thing.
Oh, I know. I used to go and when I was superintendent, go and speak to educational administration classes, and one of the things I talked with them about was the fact that, you always think that once I get over this hump, everything will be fine,
Fine, that's all coming.
And there's always humps to come, that you're not even thinking about at the time. So just get used to the challenge. And embrace that challenge. Good things can come from that. The way you go about solving whatever problem it is that's thrown in your face. We did have those kinds of problems. Now, I have to admit that social media was really just becoming big as I left the superintendency, and I'm thrilled about that.
Thanks.
So it was a factor, but not nearly what it is now. So that is a challenge because it does what you're talking about, DeWayne. It puts people in a position almost to say, I'm either here or I'm here, one or the other. And I think the funny thing about culture is that it's a slow process. It doesn't happen overnight. We didn't develop a culture when I walked in the door in 1987. I mean, it took us years, and it's still developing and changing, and should. But those challenges are always going to be there, and I don't see any slowdown of that.
I was talking to somebody, I forget, but we were talking about the role that tension plays, and that some tensions shouldn't be resolved.
No.
They have to be managed at some level, but really they are a necessity for progress. And so how you manage them, though, determines how much progress you make or not.
I think one of the things we forget in our society now is that certain amount of tension is a good thing. It keeps you questioning. One of the years, one of our big sayings was dissatisfaction. We want to be dissatisfied, not with just test scores or whatever was the big thing at the moment, but how we go about things. We never need to be satisfied We never need to feel like we're over that hump, so, now I can retire. It doesn't work that way. There are always going to be those problems, and we need those problems to keep us moving down the road.
And that reminds me of what we did in cabinet, Bruce, on Monday, where we talked about how hard defines greatness. There are times hard defines greatness.
Oh, yeah.
And there are times when it will be hard, but that's the test that we all have to meet. And I love what you said too. Like sometimes we assume that we go through this huge test and that's the one that when we master that, there'll be no more. But there's always a rogue wave. And so we have to be able to manage all of that and to lean into the difficulty, because it is hard to be a leader, which leads me to the next question I'd love to just talk to you two gentlemen about. What advice would you give current educational leaders or future leaders about how to lead in turbulent times, but also how to maintain the cohesion of a district? Because I think people could truly benefit from that, because we have so many leaders across the state right now and across the country who are trying to manage that. And YouTube represents successful examples of that.
What would we tell present and future educational leaders?
About how to maintain that cohesion and that culture.
And just communication, and both formal and informal. I'm a big believer in being visible and being approachable. And I think that the approachable part is almost more important than the visible part. I used to spend time, we had our formal get-togethers when we would come on a campus and do a presentation with the principal, and I would have, 4 or 5 people with me. I also made time to come on the campus or maintenance, custodial services, food service, the transportation department. I also made time to go visit them informally, where I was just sitting down, joking and jawing with the people who were involved. And I think that gives you a sense of being approachable. I would also ask present and future administrators or school leaders to encourage people to get into this business. We really, really need good people
I agree.
in educational leadership, and to mentor them along the way, and to help them understand that most mistakes are not the end of your life.
Right, they're not terminal.
Exactly. That we learn from those mistakes, and to help them understand that and let them make some mistakes without it being terminal.
I think the big thing that I've learned from the Leander culture is constancy of purpose. And I didn't really understand what that was before I came here, because I don't know that I'd really experienced it much in terms of an organizational culture. But when I got here, it became very clear to me very quickly that the reason Leander is successful, despite this explosive growth over time, is that there was this underlying constancy of purpose. We knew exactly what we were trying to accomplish, and we were not going to vary from that no matter what happened. And that has been a huge lesson for me that I've tried to kind of pick up and continue. We talk about it in airline terms of flying steady, through the storm. And while other people are up and down around you and falling apart, we're flying steady through the storm, knowing that it's going to be rough and we're going to be buffered and things are going to be tough.
We'll get through to the other side.
When we get through to the other side, we're good to go again, where everybody else is picking up the pieces. And so but I didn't understand what constancy of purpose was exactly. So I'm going to throw it back to you, Tom, and ask, how do you describe the constancy of purpose that you had?
The constancy of purpose I think we developed had to do with beginning with having people in the system help us define what our purpose was. And we didn't do enough of it, but we involved students as well. One of the things I've noticed is that you have a superintendent's cabinet or a student group that you meet with. So people were involved in developing that purpose, the graduate profile, the Leander way, and those grew over time. But we always pointed back to that in every meeting, in every conversation. How is this going to contribute to the purpose of what we do? And we tell stories, in the convocation, in the continuous improvement conference. We would tell success stories of how people used that constancy of purpose to get the results that our system was designed to get, over and over and over again, and in a never-ending fashion. And I think that's the way you do it. You just don't ever stop. It's got to be put out there over and over and over again.
And I think the way that I saw you doing that, and the way that we've tried to continue to do that, is through the use of the continuous improvement tools. So that whole process is what drives that same thought again and again and again, by cycling through this plan, do, study, act cycle of how do we make this work. And what it drew out for me is the two things we've landed on that feel to some people like they're new, but they're really not new. And that is ownership of learning, where the students, the learners, are the ones who are in charge of how do I learn, and how do I make sure that I'm learning, and how do I set my own goals, and how do I make sure that I come out the end with what I need. And then also this idea of we do that together, and we do it in collaborative teams. So we're a professional learning community as a whole, but we're operating in these collaborative teams where we're spotters ready all the time, helping each other to get better and improve every single day.
Monta Aiken is sitting in her house right now and, probably telepathically hearing what you're saying, and she's got a big smile on her face. It's one of the things she brought to us is that ownership of student learning, and the fact that they're perfectly capable of helping you understand how they best learn. And they're perfectly capable of working with you to chart a course of how I want to go about that and what my ultimate goals are. It doesn't happen overnight, and a lot of students will try and shy away from it, especially in the beginning. Once they understand the power of that and the fact that you are actually listening to them, they take off like a gun. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you on that.
And so a follow-up around all of that is, when you look back over your career time, and Bruce, you think about your journey up to this point and the places you've been, what impact has community cohesion played in the school district achieving its goals? Because I think it's important for current leaders to appreciate that as well. Sometimes we focus so much internally, and I know here in Leander, we do a really good job of engaging a community, but as we have navigated some very challenging spaces, has maintaining that cohesion played a role in the success of the district?
It's everything. It really is. And you're never going to get 100%.
Right.
You're always fighting to get to that 100% of people understanding and agreeing with where we're going. But there's always going to be those that don't agree. And I go back to it's boring, but you gotta educate over and over and over again, and you have to be visible and approachable. And so do your top level administrators and principals and teachers. They all have to understand it so that it gets entrenched in the community. The Vandergrift teacher can't be saying things that are different about our purpose than what the Leander teacher is saying. They've got to be constant about it and
alignment.
Understand it and almost internalize it. And that's how you get a community behind you and cohesive. It's not in the podcast or news articles. It's those thousands, millions upon millions of interactions that take place all over our community, in the grocery stores, wherever. They've got to be able to articulate what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, in a sense, how we're going to go about it.
No, I would agree. I think one of the things I learned on my leadership journey is that there are no wasted engagements. Every engagement counts. And so the other thing is I agree. It's about that day-to-day, but I think there are so many other ways that we can also pull people in. Our presence, our delivery of messaging, being on social media. But I agree, it comes back to the most fundamental way is the one-on-one. So,
well, I think things like this podcast are terribly important. Anytime Bruce is on the television, that's terribly important. How he reacts to situations. So I think it's not just one thing or the other. It's all of those things. It's interactions on Facebook.
I think it's really important for us to remember that these are community schools, and so these schools belong to the community, and our job is to produce an experience for students that reflects the hopes and dreams of the community, and that's why we asked that question in 2019. So, what are the hopes and dreams that you have for your children? Because that's what we want to meet. And so now we have developed a community-based accountability system that reflects, here's how we're doing in getting to what are the hopes and dreams that you have for your children.
I just started learning about that, and I really like what you all are doing with that.
Because we need to be held accountable to what it is. And what has been so challenging is that's easy to do in a one high school town because you have one community. In our case, we have to be really reflective and careful about the fact that, yes, we need the Vandergrift teacher to be saying the same core value as the Leander teacher, but there's nuance to what happens in the Leander community and what happens in the Vandergrift community.
Absolutely.
And we have to be aware of that. We have to be really paying attention to that and making sure that we're responsive to that.
Absolutely.
And that is challenging in 200 square miles, right?
It is.
With the population and the growth and the things that we have.
It's part of the complexity of culture.
Absolutely.
I think one of the fortunate things about our district is we have, by and large, the greatest majority of people that live in this district are just good, honest, hardworking people who care deeply about their children's education. And you and I have dealt with some outliers and people who do take that one approach or the other and can't see anything else.
You know what's fascinating
just
about
a small
that,
percentage of people.
It is. And even then, though, when I sit down with those people one-on-one, most of the time, when we start talking about their children and what their hopes and dreams are for their children, we're actually not that different.
No.
Right.
You're exactly
We actually
right.
have way more in common than we
exactly
do
right.
apart. And so usually that can be worked out. Now, of course, in some cases it doesn't, but okay. We do have our differences. But I'll tell you the biggest celebration that I have seen and that points to this whole idea of unity in the district is when we have the choral showcase in the district and we have all 7 high schools together. And the way that after every performance, every other kid in the audience stands up and cheers
for the others.
else.
Right. The band.
The first time I experienced that, I was just completely blown away. I was like, that is culture right there. That is unity right there. It's just incredible.
It is.
Well, that takes me, all of that ties into, we're nearing the end of our time here, but I want to just cover a few more things. So when you think about what makes our one LISD community so strong, Tom, you talked about the majority of our citizens are just good, hardworking people who care about their kids. I think that is one component that, as someone relatively new, I noticed right away. But what else makes our community so strong to the point where it's able to maintain its unity? Besides I think we talked about the guiding documents. We talked about, Bruce, your approach of reinstituting the complexity of the middle, which you and I talk about. But is there anything else that makes this district and this community so unique? Because we often say it's different here, and I believe it is. But what does that mean to you two?
I think for me, it's the fact that people choose to come and live here. I think when people are deciding where they want to raise most precious asset, their children, they take that really seriously. And so when they're moving somewhere, they're doing a lot of homework about
a lot of research.
Where am I going to put my kid in school? How's this community going to respond to us as a family? And as they do their research, they see and they hear that it is different here, and that they're going to get some of those things that they're looking for. And then people choose that. And as they do that, they strengthen the community. Because they bring that diversity to the table, that all has this common goal, though, of community, of family, of we're in this together and we can get through this together no matter what.
No matter what.
And I think that's what I see. In even though we're 200 square miles and so many different jurisdictions, there does seem to be some unity of purpose there about this is why I want to be here.
There is. I think people have one of the reasons this area is growing so fast is because Leander ISD has a good name, and people respect that and want to be a part of that. I think all the opportunities that you provide, the leadership Leander ISD, the way people can interact and be a part of this district is very, very important. The volunteer activities where people get to come in and actually see what's going on. That creates that kind of feeling about that constancy of purpose, and I guess causes that unity because they do talk about it and let other people know. So,
no, I completely agree, and so I like to end our time by asking a question that is going to take us down memory lane. You know, when you think, Tom, about when you first arrived here and all the contributions that you've made, what are some of your best memories about LISD?
Well, the best memory is the night I got the call that they were going to name this high school after me.
Yeah.
I think just
Well-deserved.
the best memories I have are the interactions with administrators, teachers, students, parents. I don't know if there's one, crowning achievement that we accomplished that I'm proudest of. But just along the way, there were so many.
Yeah.
When we were having the conversation earlier, I was taken back to a time where at a February conference, I had another school administrator come up to me and say, "Where do you get these people? They're all so happy. they're, how do you get these people?" And I said, "Well, they're the same people you're looking for. It's just different here."
Yes, it is.
And we make it that way by being who we are and sticking with that constancy of purpose and looking at our system as a system and working on it daily. Wow. So I don't know that there's one thing that sticks out in my mind. Each bond issue was a celebration. Each milestone was a celebration. I remember, celebrating our 10,000th student. And,
wow.
And everybody being excited about that.
Yeah.
It's the relationships that you build along the way. And I'm still really very, very good friends with a lot of the people that I was involved with.
I joined the district in January of 2022, and immediately I started hearing about the impact of a gentleman named Tom Glenn. And I didn't get a chance to meet you until that summer at the CIC conference. And it was apparent to me that what people were telling me was exactly right. So thank you so much for being here today.
Well, I appreciate that.
And so, Bruce, I would love to get your thoughts about your best memories so far. I know you still have many more left.
So thank you for that affirmation of many more left. I hope so. As I thought about this, it really came down to two examples, but they're just examples, right? So I was in a school improvement visit, and the principal brought out a kindergarten child. And this young lady stood in front of this group of adults who were here to really help improve this whole campus, and explained her learning and what she was doing and why it was important. And that moment of clarity of this 6-year-old could, without hesitation, without fear, with total confidence, stand there in front of this group of adults and explain her learning was just incredible. And that's, for me, what we're about. And then to bookend that with a much later story, this was a young lady who had been in a terrible accident when she was 3 years old, had multiple different disabilities, entered our system at 3, and then worked through our system all the way until she was turned 22. And only in the last year that she was with us did she finally get to the point of understanding enough to know that she had self-determination and that she was in charge of her future. And it took us 20 years to get to that point, but this district never gave up. They never let up. They never let the parent give up. And that, for me, is constancy of purpose. When we're prepared to put that level of commitment in to one person, to one human, to uncover their uniqueness and unleash their genius, that's who we are as a district.
Friends, we're also joined today by Dr. Sarah Grissom, Distinguished Leader and Deputy Superintendent of LISD. I've asked her to close us out by reading a piece of poetry by Judy Brown. I think it's emblematic of our conversation here and also shows us the way forward about maintaining perspective and cohesion. Dr. Sarah Grissom.
The trough. There is a trough in waves, a low spot where horizon disappears and only sky and water are our company. And there we lose our way unless we rest, knowing the wave will bring us to its crest again. There we may drown if we let fear hold us in its grip and shake us side to side and leave us flailing, torn, disoriented. But if we rest there in the trough, in silence, being in the low part of the wave, keeping our energy and noticing the shape of things, the flow, then time alone will bring us to another place where we can see horizon, see land again, regain our sense of where we are and where we need to swim.
So, gentlemen, I want to thank you both for being here today and for sharing your time and wisdom with us. Our district is a much better place because of your leadership, courage, and vision. I trust that our audience found value in our discussion and also came to the realization that no matter what confronts our one LISD community, we will hold together and move forward.